IT director with the city of Champaign. And we have a group of folks here today representing the accessible technology subgroup of the Chancellor's compact to accelerate social justice. I had to think about that for a second. And just a little background on the Chancellor's Compact. This effort was started around the beginning of the year. And the idea is to accelerate social justice in the community. And there are 6 subgroups that are working on this problem. Our group is accessible technology. Other subgroups include health and wellness, economic development, inclusive education, workforce development, community safety, and community relations. Our subgroup has been meeting since early January, and we've been trying to focus on ways and means to improve access to technology and essentially addressing the digital divide in our community. We're aware that many efforts within the community have been undertaken over the prior years to address this. None of them being 100% successful. We still have a lot of work to do, including the advent of fiber in our community almost 10 years ago. There are several local groups that now have Wi-Fi buses in the community. That's primary goal is to bring access to people, and primarily kids that don't have access to the internet, particularly over the prior year that we've just been through. There's groups at Urbana, Don Moyer Boys and Girls Club. Several projects have been undertaken, including Wi-Fi mesh at Shadowwood Mobile Home Park. I'm probably missing quite a few, but the idea is there have been a lot of efforts undertaken over the last several years to address the digital divide, but we know we still have a lot of work to do. So we're trying to garner input from the community in coming up with ideas to submit to the compact. And to that end, we had a meeting May 27th. This is our second meeting where we're hoping to get more input from the community that we might be able to benefit from and put ideas forth. And that's a little history of how we've gotten here. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Hickson. Take it from here.
Well, thanks, Mark. And as Mark said, there are these other groups that are also focusing on important areas, and they'll be soliciting input as well. And they address other related areas, such as access to education, job training, public safety. And so all these intersect, and we're focused on how can technology be accessible to everybody in this community, not just some, everybody. And so we're very fortunate tonight to have John Ruffin from City of Champaign Neighborhood Services, who has agreed to kind of help us gather some ideas from you, because although we've been at this for a long time, we know we don't, we know we need help. We know some of the things. We want to hear what you have to say.
Well, tonight we, at this point, are speaking to the choir. And so to sort of give folks something to gnaw on, Paul, we were going to take input and feedback and then allow you to present sort of the framework going forward. Since we're all have been at the table, maybe you can present that framework now. And for those who are in the audience, take input from those folks who might want to provide some feedback.
Sure, be happy to do that. I'm going to share my screen then. And what we've done is we took the input that we received from that earlier meeting that Mark referred to, and what we'd heard from other groups. I'm going to back up and say that, let's see, wait a second here. I've got to move my window so I can show you there we go. You should now be seeing the title slide to our presentation on accessible technology. Um, what I was going to say to set the stage, though, is that Mark alluded to the fact that UC2B was a project that was jointly sponsored by three entities: the University of Illinois, City of Champaign, and the City of Urbana. And what that brought to Champaign-Urbana was a 20-some million grant that created fiber rings throughout Champaign-Urbana and allowed us to connect all of the schools, all of the medical clinics, police, fire, safety, social service agencies. I know that the Refugee Center was connected. Don Moyer's Boys and Girls Club was connected. YMCA was connected. And all of those connections were at full gig speed. And that allowed the beginnings of what could then be built out in the broader community. And we did not have enough money to build out to everybody's home. That just wasn't in the cards. We didn't have enough money for that. So after a great deal of back and forth discussion between the cities and the university, it was decided that the culture of our community is basically to not have government provide these sorts of services directly, but to provide an environment in which private enterprise can provide those services. And so to leverage that internet infrastructure, we selected a private build-out partner with the knowledge that they were going to have to do that as a business. They would build out where they would make their biggest profit. And unfortunately, that meant that they went to higher income areas for their build out initially, not exclusively. And I'll say one other thing, that the UC2B project was unique in all the grants that were given in that early part of the Obama administration for community empowerment through internet. And that was, we got a grant that said there were, I believe it was 14 or 16, the number I may be quoting incorrectly, neighborhood census block areas. We could not, by the terms of the grant, we could not give money to areas that were low income, but we could give a grant to areas that didn't have adequate connectivity. So we took a survey at the time, found out who didn't have connectivity. There was a high correlation to neighborhoods that were low income, and those neighborhoods actually got fiber built to the premises. We felt good about that. Anyway, after the build out was underway for some time, one of the terms that we had with the private vendor was that for a number of years, they would give us $50,000 a year to create a community benefit fund. And so in 2017, we've had enough money in the kitty that we could then start making some awards. And so it was not only Don Moyer's Boys and Girls Club, but the Church of the Brethren, I know, got connectivity. Neighborhood Connection Center in Urbana got connectivity. Also, the First Followers program got access. They had a mobile lab that they used. So there were a number of groups that were attempting to, in addition to the ones that Mark mentioned, that were attempting to serve underserved areas. But as Mark said, we know there's a lot yet to be addressed. So the other thing I'll say before I'll show the balance of our of our proposal is we're aware that there are other parties working on this too. The UC2B board, which both Mark and I are on, is in the process of exploring ways to get state and or federal money for fiber build out and possible wireless build out in underserved areas. We know that that is very expensive because the grants that created our network to begin with were 20-some million dollars. So that is probably beyond the resources that we were offered as startup funding by the Chancellor's office. The Chancellor's office has made a very generous offer to provide up to $500,000 for each of the first 3 years of the compact to address accessible technology. So with that in mind, what we thought that we could best use that money for was to create an IT hub, someplace in our community that people could always go to, primarily to serve underserved folks and both receive support, answers, bring in their devices and say, help me, and to go actually and obtain devices. This hub will be connected with a new state of Illinois program that Governor Pritzker is setting up that will take reconditioned devices and make them available either at no cost or a very reduced cost to people who have limited incomes. But it's a strange thing in Champaign-Urbana. We have people who are doing good work already. I mentioned Don Moyers. I mentioned First Followers. I mentioned all these groups. The library has been doing great work, but we're not connecting. We don't have one place to connect to for IT leadership in serving underserved communities. And this would do that. So that's the heart of where we would propose our resources in this proposed $500K per year would go to create this. We're thinking that would probably be located, co-located with an existing social service agency that already has a willingness to engage in this. Where this is just a proposal, we don't know who that would be. But through this network of aligned groups, the work that Janice Mitchell is doing in the Urbana Neighborhood Connection Center, probably the closest people for location, the closest location for people in East Urbana is going to be her center. And so the IT hub would work with Janice's group on program delivery. And then the second thing is, we know that there is great interest in improving the connection between the university and underserved parts of the community, healing this town-gown split. And we know that there are many talented young minds in this underserved area that really have not felt entirely welcome at the campus. We want to break that barrier down. We want to establish programs that will help young people find pathway programs to the university, to Parkland, to job training programs, so that everybody in the community can be successful. So it would involve job training, technical job training, and pathways to higher education. And then the staff would work with all local internet service providers, not just with i3, which is i3 Broadband, which is UC2B's private partner, but all ISPs, Comcast and others, to improve and extend service for previously underserved individuals. Now, we're going to work especially closely with i3 and the UC2B board, because they're the ones, particularly the UC2B board, who have greatest authority over that fiber backbone. So, Raya, could I have you explain what the short-term goals are?
Thank you very much. Hello, I'm Raya. So we know that getting to those long-term goals, the hub and spoke model, and all the things that Paul just told us about will take time and work. And so to get to those end goals, we have a few short-term goals as a pathway to lead us there. And one of them is what we're doing right now, which are these community feedback sessions. As Paul mentioned earlier, we know that we don't know everything and that there are barriers and obstacles and issues and needs in the community that we're not aware of. And so that's why we're holding these sessions and hope to continue to hold them moving forward as we hopefully get this hub going and all the networking. And so we want to have as many ways for you to get feedback to us as possible. And that's something that actually we would love to hear from you about this evening. If there are better ways for us to get feedback from you and your families and your networks, please let us know. That's why we're here. The second piece of getting to these end goals of everyone being networked to the internet, having access to technology, is to take all of the entities that are currently working in this space and on these issues and connect us all together into a network so that we can have a larger total impact for our community instead of working in our disparate silos. And so, we know County Board, Housing Authority, the school districts, UC2B, as Paul mentioned, our city governments. I mean, there's a lot of things happening around technology and access. And so one of the things we want to work on is making sure we're networking all together so that we can all be on the same page and moving forward together. And then finally, we think that one of the simplest short-term initiatives is to support the amazing work that's already being done in our community and to support our community partners that have been doing exemplary work in this space and already providing the access and supports that is needed. And so we want to see how we can leverage the expertise and the resources at the U of I, as well as with our community partners, so that we can continue to support things like the Wi-Fi buses and UNCC through a variety of ways that we're still exploring, but hopefully will include, bringing devices and technology to those programs or helping to write grants, leveraging Wi-Fi or EduRoam network credentials. And again, please let us know what we can do to help expand and support the existing initiatives, because we definitely see that as a really valuable thing that we can take on as part of this. And we're going back to John.
Thank you for that great overview of the work we've done to date. Dawn, were you able to log on and see the majority of the presentation?
Yeah, I remembered I also have a tablet. And now he let me into my email on my tablet, but not on my laptop. So
okay,
I'm here.
Do you have other folks with you, or?
I had two. I've been dealing with this since before we were supposed to start. So I had two guests. I sent them to the library. I got them a ride to the library because I forgot I had a tablet, and I don't see them there though. So I'm not.
Okay.
Maybe somebody could stick their head out in the hallway because I wasn't sure what room to send them to. Thanks, Sharon.
Well, to support our engagement efforts and outreach efforts, we have in the chat provided a link to a whiteboard that we are using to build out input or capture input that we are gathering at the various community engagement opportunities. We had a meeting a couple weeks ago, and we used the Jamboard, and that link was and is still open. And for this meeting, we've created another Jamboard where folks can add to that, add to the whiteboard in order to provide input relative to our presentation if folks don't want to speak offline or want to access and provide input offline. Of any of the participants online, relative to the presentation, were there any points that really resonated with you, or you want us as a committee to explain further?
So I'm hearing that you want to establish a center. What I'm hearing from people is they want to be able to get online at home. Have we any strategy for helping people get service into their houses? I mean,
Yes.
can we twist one of the providers' line to arms to, maybe providing service to a couple of different places that could be access points in the community where people would be able to sign on to existing Wi-Fi?
We're looking at all options. Like I said, the big option is to actually build out community Wi-Fi, but that's going to take money, more money than we would have in this allocation from campus, but not more money than is part of the ARPA allocation that have come to both cities and the county. I mean, last night, the county board had a study session that was almost 3 hours long, addressing the topic of how can Champaign County make internet, affordable internet, accessible throughout the county. They have $40 million that they have received. They have other needs. They have a lot of other needs. The city of Champaign has received, 20 some million? 25. Urbana has received, I think, a smaller allocation, 20. So there's a fair amount of resources and there's more than demand. It's not that I'm suggesting that can all go toward connectivity, but a big lift to do something that would establish community-wide within underserved neighborhoods. Wi-Fi is possible, and we're exploring it. But I don't think that the $500K from the chancellor's office is a very good route for that. It wouldn't be enough to do it. And if you did it partially and then you didn't have the inevitable issue of you serving some and not serving other deserving people. So our approach is that the best use of this resource would be to create a place that one per place that you could go to receive technical help, which right now we don't have, and to support labs like the one you have at Church of the Brethren, and give you some additional resources for the program you're already delivering, and maybe arrange for the person who ends up in that center to come to your center and deliver programs in your neighborhood, to come to UNC and deliver programs to Janice's group. So that's the thinking we had behind this. We think that the funds that we have potential access to, and there's no guarantee that we're going to get it, would best be used to create what we don't have now, which is one place that the community could turn to for this sort of assistance at a higher level than they're getting.
I think having that as a resource would be great, but when the center's closed, or the anything, when the center's closed, what do we do after 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, when the kids have got a paper due and they need to do some research? I'm not a techie, but I know how we were able to kind of connect just between church members and the church Wi-Fi by making passwords available. Is there such thing as a Wi-Fi on a pole? I mean, can we have a router on a pole in a tree that would overlap with another router and a pole in a tree? Because right now, the churches, some of them are in such disarray behind the storm damage that they're trying to repair so they can get back into their churches after COVID. I'm more and more thinking that they're just like, I don't know, is there anything to do? I mean, infrastructure is great, but if people only have access, the library closes at 9 o'clock. And if the kids take the bus, use their bus pass to go to the library after school, if they're there past 5 or 6 o'clock, they can't use their bus pass to get home. So now we're into probably the food budget, or walking from downtown or Green Street to get home at night in school, during school years, in the dark, after dark. The young people are at a disadvantage if they don't have the same access as people of means, for lack of a better phrase. I mean, even even a discount. I've been pushing those papers about the emergency funds, get people involved with that. But I think in the long run, people need to have access in their house.
I agree completely.
Paul, in terms of the long-term goals and objectives that you outlined, improving access was one of the third item outlined.
Yeah.
Are the goals that were outlined, establishing an IT hub, leveraging an IT hub to train and educate folks, and then improving access in the home, are they prioritized, or will
it was no, they weren't prioritized. Okay. They're all important, John, and we think that person, if we create the center and then we have a full-time person, we have a full-time person who has tech skills, who is in the neighborhood, who's hearing, who has a target on his or her back, and that says, you got an IT problem? Come talk to this person. That's going to be the best way of any for us to gain meaningful input that will then guide us in these strategic discussions that are trying to happen with the city, with the county, with funding agencies. And we do need this. We need, Dawn, you're absolutely right. The answer to this is connectivity to the home. We hear that loud and clear. But the 500K for 3 years isn't going to do that. And it could help us create a meaningful resource that could do some good while we at the same time try to get major funds to get that connectivity to the homes. We see those as working together, not against each other.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, I guess so. For with the establishing a centralized hub to address IT problems, what problems would this IT hub address? So if Ms. Blackman doesn't have internet connectivity, then I guess the only way to address that problem would be to give them connectivity, not just to someone who can answer questions, right? Yeah.
Well, I would use that kind of a hub like when I have 2 or 3 different operating systems going on in the same computer lab to get things aligned and keep things working. I mean, right now, if we get a bug or anything, I have to pay somebody to come out, and my budget doesn't support it all the time. We have filters, but if we have somebody come into the lab that knows enough to beat the filter to get where they want to go, but not enough to protect the system, then I'm really thinking about, we have to have the network, thinking about taking the network out, because that way only one computer gets infected. But having a resource for equipment. I mean, right now we're running 7 on most of our computers. And one has 10, the rest of them have 7, which is a great improvement. I mean, at one point we had 9 computers on 6 different operating systems. So having them all on one is a great thing. But I know that a lot of times organizations upgrade and get new computers, and there could be in that place where the hub is a resource network, so that if a university group gets all new computers, they have some place to wipe them and send them to so they can be dispersed. That would be a big help. And I see the need for a hub, because people are going to have issues that don't necessarily have to do with connectivity, that may just be a training issue. You know, and a person who is knowledgeable would recognize, oh, well, they need to know how to do this. But all of that is helpful if people can get into the center.
Right. You're exactly right, Dawn. And I think that the other thing that we have heard in previous listening sessions and in interactions I've had with neighborhood groups is I've heard a lot of folks from the senior citizen community say, I know I need to know how to do this, but I don't know how to do it. Teach me basic skills, please. And I think that center can become an education center in that sense as well. And I don't mean that all that teaching would occur just there. It could happen at your place, at UNC, a whole bunch of other places. I'm sorry, what? Oh,
Rick. Well, hi, Mr. Weibo. How are you?
Good evening, John. Thank you all again for this conversation. It's rich and provocative. I guess I have a question to the group that's been doing these listening sessions. the school district Unit 4, and presumably also in Urbana, had a great experiment in trying to distribute access, equipment, and resources in the last year. I'm curious to know what lessons the teachers, the tech support, and the parents, those are three different constituencies. And of course, the kids are in there too, but teachers, tech support from the schools, and the parents would say are obstacles and opportunities that could make the community stronger in this regard. It was a fascinating experience to see them distribute all those computers and try to create all the network support they needed. What have we learned from them? What would it teach this kind of a project?
Mark, you worked with Reverend Comer on those mobile buses and some of the school issues. Could you say what you picked up in that experience?
Well, Rick, very good questions. And unfortunately, there's no one here from the school district that could address that really could tell a lot more. But with the buses, for example, Reverend Comer's bus, they were aware of kids that the example he gave me stuck in my mind was kids were going and sitting in front of a barber shop because it had Wi-Fi that they could sit and access. And so they were trying to get the buses in communities where kids need it. But you can imagine a bus that's got maybe a couple 100-foot radius is not going to get many families. Specifically, the question you asked, there are a few issues I was aware of, but this was through the experiment we did at Shadowwood Mobile Home Park, where we set up a Wi-Fi mesh over the mobile home park, and the kids had I want to say they were the Chromebooks that Unit 4 handed out, and they did run into some technical issues. The Chromebooks didn't always perform as expected. Kids weren't always able to access as expected. I know there was a fair amount of troubleshooting that had to be done. Another interesting artifact from that project was it was set up to provide access to kids living in the mobile home park there on North Market. But we knew we had only limited bandwidth. The initial hope was we could make it wide open for anyone living in the park, but the primary goal was to make sure kids had access. So access was restricted only to kids connecting directly to the Unit 4 online learning, which we believe helped. But the interesting effect is other folks in the neighborhood were kind of left thinking, well, it's great for the kids, but I have a need for it too. You know, why can't I get the connectivity? So, I don't have a great answer to your question, but I know there are issues. It would be interesting to talk to Unit 4 about how many of those Chromebooks were successful. And I see somebody that may be able to add more info to that than I. So Sharon, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I was just going to read 2 emails from teachers whom I asked. And one of the Urbana liaison teachers said that most adults and unaccompanied minors from Guatemala have very limited knowledge of internet and computer devices. So most of the families that they worked with this year needed help learning the most basic stuff, such as how to turn a Chromebook on and how to charge a hotspot. So really basic things that were connected to the Chromebook were a big challenge. And they suggested doing more videos that could be posted on Facebook to reach folks with basic information. And then a second teacher said, many of our families have so little experience with technology, we would need some very basic training. We need classes like in the early 80s when computers were first being introduced in schools and slowly into households, how to connect to the Wi-Fi. And this is a Champaign teacher. She said also that just trying to identify kind of go-to people with different parts of the community and finding out what their experiences are working with these families would be better than actually asking the families, because the families don't really even know what they don't know, or don't know what to ask. So obviously people who are truly disconnected are really challenged with how to help their kids get online to do the work. And that's a real, I mean, I observed that when we were doing the Wi-Fi buses in the spring of 2020, is we had the Wi-Fi turned on, but then there was a whole set of steps people needed to take to even get online to get the work. And I know a lot of teachers were handing out paper copies to families as well. I think that does somewhat of justice to the 2 emails that I got.
Yeah, I just want to, I'm a parent of 2 elementary kids in Unit 4. And so I was just going to echo a little bit of that. I consider myself a fairly tech savvy person and pretty good at troubleshooting. But, oftentimes there would be a kid or a couple of kids in the class whose mics were not set up right, and then they would unmute and it would blow out everybody's ears, right? And nobody knew how to fix this problem, and it took until legitimately maybe April for them to figure out how to fix these kids' mics. And I'm sure it's a simple fix, but if nobody knows how to do it, or if that child's guardians don't speak English, or whatever the barriers may be, it's really problematic. And the same thing with the learning management systems, even beyond the Chromebook itself. Some teachers were really great with the Google Classroom, and it was really easy to understand how, as families, we were supposed to navigate it and find our assignments. Other teachers were not as good at it, and it was very problematic for my 5th grader specifically to know what he was supposed to be doing, when it was due. So I would say on the teacher side of things, without strong training on how to run a good learning management system, even with a Chromebook and access, it still was really hard to use a lot of times.
I think that both those last 2 sets of comments are really helpful. And Mark, I guess I would pose to the project and Paul, for the purposes of this as a social justice project, you better know the answers to those questions that the teachers had. Dawn told you she has 5 different operating systems going on in her church. Once you spread out to those communities, that problem magnifies itself. The language issue magnifies itself. The multiple siblings in a house magnify themselves. I really am urging you to be much more thorough in listening and learning from those experiences, because whatever system you create, if it can't deal with the fact that Dawn becomes a service provider but has computers with multiple operating systems, that's a problem that will persist and not function. And once again, the people who come to those settings get the second-class service. They don't get the service they deserve. And when you're standing up and saying it's about social justice, it really needs to show that kind of quality engagement. Go back and intentionally talk to the teachers, talk to those tech support people, and think of that as magnifying the scope of the real challenges you face in terms of reaching out. It is about literacy. It is about the technical equipment and the hardware and the infrastructure, but it's also about the approach that's taking to learning from the people that are struggling in that context. Thank you.
Well, let me jump in here, because one of the things, I had contact with all of those groups during the last school year. And what I found was that the Chromebooks did not give the kids access. Initially, they didn't have access to the internet, and then the school district jumped in and provided some discounted service through AT&T, but then they could only direct connect to Unit 4's site. So they couldn't go to National Geographic to do research, or they couldn't sign on to another network. We literally set a Chromebook on top of the modem, and they couldn't sign in to either of the networks that we have here at the church. And they had, some of the high schoolers had been able to do so for a couple of years ahead of that. So clearly there was a difference in the access on those Chromebooks for different populations. And I am not the only one who noticed that. We had 8 people comment at the last meeting that came here because I kept twisting their arms, but they already had a bad taste about the Chromebooks because they didn't get access until the week school was out. The week before school was let out, they finally got full access, or anywhere near full access. And we held classes in the shade structure at the garden because the Wi-Fi was accessible because the garden's between the 2 schools, Columbia Center, where Dr. Howard was, and Stratton. But it was done at 5 or 6 o'clock. So we bought hotspots. We handed out hotspots to kids who lived in the area and had been coming to the shade structure, and showed them how to use them. But Jiminy, how many kids fell through the cracks? I heard many comments and read many comments about students not participating. They didn't have the skills to participate. And without being able to get online in off times other than in the unit site, I mean, a Facebook, a YouTube video on how to do this that could have been accessed when they weren't supposed to be in class would have been a wonderful thing once we provided the Chromebooks.
So, Rick and Dawn, you're making an excellent point, and I don't want to be critical of the school districts. They have a difficult situation. What what you're describing is a result of the basically parental controls that they have set on those Chromebooks. They do not want students going to porn sites. They do not want students engaging in bullying behavior, and they lock it down. Now, that has consequences. And now you're into the issue of where are those boundaries? And those are boundaries that parents, librarians, educators have always faced. You know, do I let my kid just go out in the neighborhood? Do I tell them where they can go? Do I go with them? These are related issues playing out in a virtual space.
But there are other filters that can be used that don't block everything.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. So in that case, the issue is really with the filters that were applied. There have been other community efforts that have employed multiple portals. So a portal for adults in the neighborhood, which are more open, and a portal for school children that are more limited. Rick's talking about making sure that we listen to these issues, and and so are you, Dawn. Those are really, we take those messages critically, very much to heart. But I'm suggesting the problem isn't technological. It's social, and which tools are chosen. If we had more robust connectivity that allowed people to have internet to their home in an affordable way, then that could be a decision that every parent is making on their own. Mesh routers today allow you to set parental controls. And you can say, my 5-year-old can go to these sites and not those sites. My 15-year-old can go to these sites and not those sites. And they're a different set. And my husband and I, we can go wherever. Well, that's a decision that each parent can make. And if they had the ability to do that, and then could go to an IT center and say, help me set this up. This is what I want to do. It would all be doable. What we're dealing with are the idiosyncrasies of these being district devices set up in district ways that have produced the effect that you're describing.
I think I want to circle back a little bit and say, while I appreciate the complexity of that point and the parental controls embedded in the district machines, that is not my concern as I'm expressing the need for you to consult with them, the parents, the teachers, and the tech folks in that regard. That was a closed loop system. It had reasons for being that way. That's important to understand. How were the machines distributed? How was the tech service provided? How did that work? How could it have worked better? How did the school district deal with parents who said, oh, we've got a machine at home, but it has Windows 7 on it? Or it's operating, it's an old Mac machine still. How do you accommodate that? My concern is the social control, the parental controls issue, and the description you just gave, Paul, totally reasonable. It's a complex social dynamic. It's going to exist when you open up the network. And it's going to play itself out. My concern is prior to that. How do you be sure to build in the safeguards where less than 30% of homes, according to a recent Pew study, 30% of homes that have incomes below $30,000 have a piece of hardware in their home. So where do they get the hardware? How do they support that piece of hardware? They get an old one. How do they maintain that? You don't have to have the answers for those questions, but I do think the process of building an infrastructure has to be able to accommodate those nuances in the community. We're not talking about rich folks here. We're not talking about college. You had enough problems with university students trying to figure out how to operate online. Come on, let's think about who we're talking to here in terms of socioeconomic status, in terms of educational status, in terms of language status. That's the place that I'm playing. The parental controls, that was the isolated case of that closed network. These other things will transfer across that network to any other new network you establish.
I agree. And the person who we would hire in that role to operate that center needs to be as much a social scientist as a technologist. They have to enter that world with those questions that you asked high in their mind. And so we're looking for a rather special type of person if we get this grant. You're smack on. In fact, I'm going to remember your name, and if we get an advisory board, you may get an invitation.
Can you, Paul, talk about the process going forward? And so we are gathering input. How long? Are there other opportunities for input? I think Rick was right on when he talked about we need to sort of broaden our efforts to engage and seek out sort of those different pockets. with targeted engagement. Can you talk a little bit about opportunities to provide feedback and other opportunities to engage?
Well, above and beyond tonight, you can certainly reach out to those of us who are on this committee. I'll put my email in the chat, in the Jamboard, and we really do welcome any and all feedback. That tonight has been very valuable, and Dawn, I go to you for advice. I told Tracy Smith the other day, if I was really smart, I would just stop what I'm doing and job shadow you for about a month. I think that I would learn more that way. The problem is my project in Africa won't let me do that, but I think we have the wisdom in the community. I look to people like Dawn. I look to people like Rick. I look to people like John, Janice, Marvin. I just think that we have the smarts and we have the insight. I mean, my goodness, think of all the good ideas Sharon Irish has come up with since UC2B came to town, and before. We need in some way to listen to each other, gather this information, and then have a place to gather it to. And that's why I keep coming back to this center. And I hope I'm not placing emphasis on the technology. I'm placing emphasis on the social dynamic that this would create, a place for this to land and have a person there who is a good listener, is a good teacher, is a good networker. That's what we need.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any other comments from those out on Zoom or in the room today? This community discussion is being recorded. It will be replayed on UPTV over the next month. And hopefully, as folks are watching this, they'll be able to see the links there that are in the chat and be able to add to the Jamboard that will stay live. And then also, as we continue to do these listening sessions, we'll continue to build on the input we've received to date. And so that it's a evolving document, if you will. Mark, did you want to make some comments?
I just had a thought that what we're working on really here, this group, the resources that we may have available to us are somewhat limited, and really the center is probably the max of what we could accomplish with the resources that may be available to us. Yet I continue to hear from the prior discussion, from this discussion, other discussions, that the real need is connectivity, which is beyond the scope of what this group can accomplish. But at least I appreciate hearing this, because several of us in this room at least will be in position to carry this message forward to the cities, to the county, that connectivity needs to be addressed first. The center we're proposing would be much more valuable if we had connectivity across the community already, because then there would be so many more people the center could help. So I have to admit a level of frustration on my part, only in that we're somewhat limited here in what we can accomplish. But I hear what's being said, and I will do everything I can to carry this message forward, at least to the city of Champaign, where I work. So I just wanted to share that.
the good of the order, are there any additional comments? I want to be respectful of folks' time. If there aren't any additional comments, we want to thank everybody for attending today. Salim, I see you got your hand raised.
So before we end, I just want to call back to something that Raya had mentioned. Long-term goals, of course, connectivity in the home and devices in the home. But for short-term, as a library kind of liaison, I would be remiss if I didn't mention there are tools in place, whether it's Urbana Public Library, Champaign Public Library, there are tools to get people the resources they need, the laptops in the home, hotspots in the home. We work with people to make sure that they have access where they need it. So we're always welcome to ideas here at the library. I know Urbana is as well, but I just want to make sure in the short term, making sure we share resources with each other, what's going on in the community. There's so many times where I'm helping someone and they say, I didn't know the library offered that, or I didn't know Urbana Free Library offered that. There are resources in place. If we just kind of, a big thing for me, a big takeaway is information sharing, knowing what each other is doing, because, there's so much we offer as a community, the neighborhood connection. There's so many organizations who are individually doing great work, but if we pool our resources, we don't have to reinvent the wheel if we don't have to. There's things that are already in place, systems already in place to help people get the help they need.
Tech training workshops as well.
Yeah, we do have tech workshops. We have a great technology librarian. She's willing to go out into the community. I know the past year, of course, with the pandemic has been difficult, but now that we're able to kind of get back into regular programming, we do have tech workshops, intro workshops at every level, beginner level, intermediate, and expert. And those are all online. And yeah, it's just sharing what's out there so people know what we offer and how they can get resources and access.
So as we close tonight, I want to thank everyone for attending, both online and those who were able to come out in person and share with us tonight. And as I said earlier, there will be continuing opportunities to provide input and feedback relative to this effort. And we are willing to hear said input. And so please feel free to contact any of the folks that are sitting around the table, certainly. And as Paul said, he'll leave his information in the chat so that you can reach out to him directly. Thank you.
So with that, are we closed? Okay, thanks everyone for coming, and thanks for your interest. Keep Sharon put up a great link also if you want to send comments to a email address she monitors. That's in there as well as mine. So we're all ears, and we're eager to hear any additional input you want to provide. Thanks much. Bye-bye.